We are back, ladies and gentlemen. What a week. East West Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl week has concluded. We got a ton to talk about, brother. Today's episode is going to be kind of centered around some NFL draft prospects whose stocks on the rise. Guys like Mike Green, Shamar Stewart kind of stole the show in Mobile, but there's a good amount of notable performances, guys that we really want to talk about. If you can just, force yourself to get past the quarterback group that continues to underwhelm for the most part. Nick and myself were not in Mobile, but we were able to get our hands on the film for both these events, despite not being able to attend in person. So, which that I'm really thankful for. So, we're going to also get to a couple mailbag questions centered around kind of the Steelers trading down in the first round and also some defensive tackle stuff. But first things first, man, how you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good, but it's not every day you wake up to a trade notification like that in the NBA, where it's like you're so focused on the All-Star week, and then all of a sudden the NBA's like, all right, hold our beer, and then
Yeah.
they just do something crazy like that. I just couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that.
Yeah, I tweeted that this morning too. Like I sat there and stared at my phone for about 10 minutes and I'm like, how does this happen? I'm sitting there seeing all of like most of my timeline is, football folks, obviously, but still follow the NBA. And everybody's like, what's the football equivalent to this? And I'm like, this doesn't happen. Like, this is a 25-year-old player who's like one of the best offensive players probably of his like generation. I mean, he's been
Justin
like what
Herbert for TJ Watt is what that's for.
yeah, I mean, it's just absolutely absurd, man. But yeah, it's been a crazy week in sports. I mean, we got a lot to talk about. We didn't go with some of the like the bigger names to come out of Mobile, but there's so many notable prospects that I'm really excited to talk about. But just a reminder for everybody, if you guys could just hit that like button for me, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, all that jazz. Also, drop us your questions if you want those answered. The best ones, could appear, in future videos, or we can also answer those in the comments as well. Also, I haven't been really good at promoting this, and I apologize for that. But there are NFL draft film rooms for channel members on the channel already. So I've already done those on Emeka Buka from Ohio State, Matthew Golden from Texas, Caleb Johnson from Iowa, Cam Ward. There's a full game film breakdown in there. So I'm gonna have another one coming out this week. Those are basically coming out like weekly. The link is in the description if you guys are interested in that. So before we get into our risers, I saw a second question that I kind of wanted to get into that I thought was a good one. This one's from C. Smitty on Twitter. He said, "Help me understand. The Steelers' four-man rush is going to be TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Keanu Benton, and Alex Highsmith next season. Any defensive tackle selection is going to be coming off the bench. Why would we spend a first-round pick on that? Cam Hayward might retire soon, but he's still on the team. So what are your thoughts on that in general? I mean, we've already done, if you haven't seen it, Nick and I have already like ranked our top needs for the Steelers heading into the NFL draft process. So you guys can go back and watch that video. I'll try to link that at the end as well. But what are your thoughts on like defensive tackle in round one specifically? And is that a direction that you could see the Steelers going? And is it one that you would go with?
So I think it's a little bit complicated. I would say that they definitely need more of a nose tackle type, but getting an heir to Cam Hayward is actually making a lot of sense with how this draft class is stacked in terms of talent. You look at the interior defensive line class. I mean, we were watching down in Mobile. There were plenty of defensive tackles
Oh, yeah.
making the name for themselves, and we'll get to one in particular. But you look at that position and just the names in that group, there are guys that are going to be much more worthy of a first round pick than say like any other position. So you might want to go with more of a want over a need, like even if
Hmm.
it's a luxury at that spot, because preparing for the future, we've seen it before. The Steelers back in 2011, did they really need Cam Hayward? They needed a cornerback at the time, and they ended up passing on cornerback, and it ended up being the best thing they did in that class because Hayward ends up being an all pro, for them, and
Yeah.
they don't get too much else out of the corners in that class if they had ended up going that direction, and we're and to get to like one of the particular risers from the Senior Bowl, Darius Alexander is a guy that just was you could not go a single day without mentioning him. There was consistent twitch, pop, all these types of traits with his hands, with his fluidity. I saw a rep where he's in a 2 point stance as a wide nine, like he's way off the edge, and he ends up beating Josh Connerly with speed off the edge, and I'm just like, this is some Chris Jones type of stuff that you don't really see all that
Yeah,
often.
crazy rep.
Yes, and like you watch him like, string some moves together like a club swim, like as an interior, 3 tech, and there was there's a play against Pitt where he had like a 9 or like a 60-yard like interception return for a touchdown that really, made headways, as people were starting to like dive into his film. And
Hmm.
I really think Darius Alexander, there's not a single player who made more money than him in terms of his performance. If you didn't know his name going in, you do now.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, speaking of the question about the Steelers drafting a defensive tackle in round one, I always think of the draft as like best player available at a position of need. I don't necessarily think defensive tackle is like their top need, but I also look at the best players in this draft class, and a lot of them play that position. And you mentioned just like planning for the future. I think both of you and I have had conversations like off air just about the Steelers, the state of the roster, the direction of the franchise, things like that. I don't necessarily think that this is a team that's necessarily going to be a contender next year anyway. And if I have the chance to like get like a top tier elite type of talent, I'm going to take that guy regardless, even if it's not
Exactly.
necessarily somebody who's going to come in and play 75% of the snaps next year, whatever. There's so many different like archetypes of players, like you mentioned, like needing a nose tackle. There's guys like Kenneth Grant that are 340 pounds, like coming out of Michigan. Like he's somebody that I think is going to be in that like fringe first round range. I've already talked a lot about Derek Harmon on this channel. I'm a huge fan of him. He's more of like a 3 tech. And then you just mentioned like Alexander, but also another guy who I thought like had some real flashes in Mobile, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, like a guy who's really young, still like very early on the like his developmental pathway. There's just a lot of guys, a lot of talent, and there is depth in this class too, to where like they don't necessarily have to take one in round one, and they can still come away with like a really good starter down the line as well. So it's not something I'm saying they have to take a defensive tackle round one, but it's also like I would be okay if that's the direction that they went in. So I kind of wanted to get into my first riser at the Senior Bowl. There was a lot of interesting one-on-one type battles, but Jack Bech from TCU was somebody that I was really excited to see. I was texting with somebody who was in Mobile, and like the TCU guys were really intriguing to me on film. Savion Williams unfortunately pulled out of the event, but Bech is a former tight end, turned wide receiver. It's a dude that had over 1,000 yards last year, 9 touchdowns. You do worry a little bit about guys that break out during their senior season with very little production prior to that. But I think Bech really solidified himself as like a legit NFL prospect this past weekend. One of my pet peeves, man, is like I hate watching big receivers who don't understand how to use their size to their advantage. That is not Jack Bech. Like this dude understands how to create space for himself by using his body either at the break point or late in the rep. In those contested catch situations, we saw him win on some fades and things like that down in Mobile. For someone with his build, man, I think his hips are pretty fluid. He blocks with maximum effort. We saw that a couple times as well, but that's on his film. Pretty good technique. He only had 1 drop last season. That was, again, something that I kind of expected coming off his tape. But, the one-on-one press cover stuff, like, just looked really, really easy for him, regardless of, like, who he was lining up against. But, I just really like watching him run routes, man. Like, he's a guy who understands how to get guys' hands off his frame. I saw him utilize a couple of different head fakes or rocker steps at the top of the break to get separation. I just wanted to see like how he was going to look against better athletes. And yeah, I mean, I thought he had a really good week, man. Yeah, I just out of curiosity looked at like where he was at on the consensus board. He was 117 on the consensus board the last time it updated. I think he's a day 2 lock, assuming he doesn't absolutely bomb the combine or there's some sort of like injury thing that I'm not like particularly aware of. But it's a good player, man. I'm not sure, where he's going to come off the board, but there's a lot to like. And I think one of the better stories, in sports over the past like month or so as well.
Yeah, he had a terrific like game in during the Senior Bowl. Like
Mm-hmm.
he was making plays at the catch point. You could really see like his ability to win through contact. He was also saying like, I hate the term 50-50 balls because to me it's 25-75 ball, and I'm like,
Yep.
Yep. I definitely agree with that, especially with the way he plays. Getting into the, staying with the same theme, in terms of receivers, I thought Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State was probably one of the other receivers who had a pretty good like overall week. There was a lot of receivers that kind of made headway in terms of like wasting time with like their releases off the line of scrimmage, especially in one
Drives
on
me
ones.
insane.
That they call those the TikTok releases from what I'm reading
Yeah.
nowadays. But you watch Jaden Higgins. I thought he showed like good like ability to be fluid, like out of his breaks. Like he was consistently like on time. There were a few instances where like guys were able to mirror him, but he's
Hmm.
able to also win at the catch point. You saw him win on a back shoulder ball from Ollie Gordon of all people during the Senior Bowl game, who ended up throwing the touchdown pass. He ends up boxing out. He knows how to use his frame. He knows how to box out. And,
Oh yeah.
you mentioned that thing with Jack Besh. And I really think Higgins did a really good job in that regard. And I thought those two definitely made the most money out of the receivers that were down in Mobile, which you like to see with the big receivers. Usually they struggle in those types of environments. They're not able to create as much separation. They don't quite win as at the catch point as often
Hmm.
because corners are consistently like try to like grab every time, when they're
Oh yeah.
panicking in those
Got a
one-on-one
bigger strike
environments.
zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I thought this two played extremely well.
Yeah, I mean, leading up to the Senior Bowl, man, I kind of finished my scouting evaluation of him. The last game I watched was actually the Utah game, and he obliterated pretty much anyone that lined up across from him. It was an absolute clinic. I think he finished with like a buck 50 and a touchdown. You just love the size. I mean, you mentioned like his frame. He's 6'4", 215 pounds. He's not like explosive in anything that he does, but everything is just so smooth, man. It was a good shout, like by you, like talking about him at the beginning. He's just a monster, like on back shoulder throws. The footwork is super coordinated off of the
Yeah.
line of scrimmage against press coverage, and you saw that a couple different times in those one-on-one drills because of like the lack of straight line speed. I do worry about this archetype of wide receiver and how it translates to the NFL. I think we've seen guys similar to him struggle
He
at the
does have an
next
upright
level.
stance out of his stems. Like whenever he's coming off the line of scrimmage, like I noticed
Yeah.
he would play kind of upright. So I do think he needs to refine that a little bit.
A lot of that too is because like when he's actually beating guys deep, it's normally off of like double moves or like manipulating his pace or like stuff like that rather than just like absolutely burning by guys, which like credit to him, like he's made that work. It just I do worry about like what it's going to look like at the next level where
Yeah.
you got the NFL caliber athletes, the guys that run like the 4.3, 4.4s, and they're going to be able to like recover if you do get them off balance a little bit. But there's a lot to like with Higgins' game, man. Just like as like a chain mover, possession guy, I like him a lot. There's a lot of technical refinement to his game, and just because of like how good he is, like finding voids in zone coverage, like at Iowa State, like they did move him into like the slot a little bit. So I do think like there is a little bit of a cushion there to where if you get him at the next level and you notice like, all right, he's not really separating the way that we need him to on the outside, he's got the versatility to kick inside for you. So I think that there's potential here for him to be a really good complementary player at the next level. The next
There's
guy I want to
always
talk,
like having a floor like that.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I like that. I like that with him too. We can kind of stick with the theme of like pass catchers coming out of this event. Elijah Arroyo from Miami, man, like you shouted out the strength of this tight end group last week. Those guys delivered for you and then some this past week in Mobile. But I thought Arroyo was my favorite guy, man. Like he was another late breakout guy, similar to kind of Besh, but he's been hampered with a ton of injuries up until this past season. But he was someone that I was familiar with coming into the week. Like I knew his name, but I haven't actually studied him. That's going to change like very, very soon because this cat is explosive. The acceleration is just like top notch for a player at this position. The more that I watch his game, the more impressed I am and see the vision of him as like a field stretcher at the next level. Dude, he looks like a freaking wide receiver in and out of his breaks. I mean, some of these one-on-ones, obviously those are catered to the offense, but just the way that he was moving stood out in a very positive way. He just looked significantly different than the majority of the players there at the event. He didn't look out of place to me as a blocker either, like in the drills that I was able to get to. I do want to go back and check the tape on that because I need a bigger sample size for that aspect of the game. The Senior Bowl is not necessarily a great indicator there, but if that checks out, man, even to like an adequate level to where I feel comfortable putting him in line because I already know that he could be a move piece for me. We're talking about a prospect that I think has pretty insane upside, if provided he can stay healthy, which I understand based on what I've read about him is definitely not a sure thing. But not even trying to be hyperbolic or anything like that, man. I was absolutely blown away by the movement skills of this dude, and I think we just have so many talented players at this position in the NFL. And then you look at this class, you look at the Tyler Warrens, the Colson Lovelands, those type of guys. It looks like we're going to get a couple more of them, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely for sure. And you watch Arroyo come out of his breaks, like he's extremely efficient with his footwork. He wasn't wasting time off the line of scrimmage. He definitely knew how to use that subtle contact at the top of his stem just to create
Mm-hmm.
that last second separation. But also a really key detail. There was a play where Tyler Shuck, he's on a scramble. He actually was a rollout, play action design, and he gets caught up in the trash like a little bit, and he ends up working. He sees like the safety, like his leverage. He's gonna keep running, so he's like, okay, if I stop, I'm gonna be wide open. And he stops.
Mm-hmm.
He settles into that space, and he gets a touchdown out of that. And I just thought that was I like those types of details because I've seen so many receivers this year just not run to space, and they run into that leverage, and it infuriates me
Yeah.
as someone who just like sees that open space. Like you need to understand where that space is, especially in the red zone. You want to find that grass. um
And that's not
Saying
always something that's easy to teach either. Some of that's just
yes.
a feel thing that you get over the course of years playing the game, but also like being quarterback friendly. We talk about that a lot, like in the scramble drill, but also against zone coverage. And it's we want guys who can separate because like beating man coverage is like oftentimes what determines your ceiling. But the NFL is still 68% zone coverage for the most part.
Yes.
So like you're gonna have to find understand how to tempo your routes, work your ass back to the quarterback. But continue. Who's your next guy that you want to talk about?
I was gonna say on the offensive side, Miles Frazier, I was
Good
absolutely
shout.
blown away with his performance. So
Hmm.
he ends up measuring in at like 6'5", 320, but he ends up clearing my threshold. So I typically look for an 80-inch wingspan or a 33-inch arm length, and he ends up hitting right around that benchmark. They end up playing him both at guard and tackle, and he just looked incredible. There was a rep at the end of one of the practices where Princely Umanmielen, who is a freak of
Freak show.
nature, yeah,
Freak show.
absolute freak of nature, he comes off with a spin move. He mirrors that, and then he tries to beat him outside, and he ends up just carrying him up the arc. And I'm just like, okay, dude, this is the type of stuff I like to see. I like to see, you know, this type of technician. And I look at this sort of detail a ton when it comes to offensive tackles. I'm not really the type that likes to go with like the raw type of players like Emory Jones down there. I thought he struggled quite a bit in terms of being
Same.
able to like, just be refined with his hands. He was consistently wide. He was lunging. I didn't see any of that from Frazier. His hands were consistently inside of the edge rusher's frame, like defensive tackle. It didn't matter where he was playing. And I thought the fact that he showed that position versatility, he played left tackle actually his first year in college. So I thought that was like impressive. Like he's able to play just about everywhere. He's got that versatility. He looks like a great athlete. He could pull out in space. I really think this is a guy that's just going to absolutely skyrocket up boards, especially with how like controversial this tackle class has been. I wouldn't be shocked to see Frazier end up going like ahead of some of like even like Emory Jones at tackle in this case. Like I really think that Frazier made an absolute name for himself.
Yeah. Even going into the week, I kind of had Frazier. So full disclosure, like I've spent the majority amount of my time just trying to like focus on position groups that are going to be more prevalent to like Steelers conversation. So I haven't really watched as many offensive linemen as I would have liked to. heading into like this point of the process. But Frazier is a guy that I have been familiar with for a little bit. And he's someone that like as a mid round, I was more projecting him to be a guard at the next level, but I was interested in him as a potential like mid-round dart throw for the Steelers, just because I do think that he has the requisite amount of athleticism to play, inside for you in a zone-heavy blocking scheme. But one of the things I like about Frazier is just the experience. Like you mentioned, just like watching him and Emory Jones, I think the difference in technique between the two guys is notable, just in the way that they use their hands. But also, like, 3,200 career snaps for Frazier. Like, there's a lot to like with this dude. Like, he's been playing at this level for a long time against some really stout competition in the SEC. So, yeah, it's a good shot from you. I'm going to have to go back
out
to
of 53 career starts, by the way. He only
yeah.
missed 4 games in his career. Like,
Yeah.
that's appealing
Absurd.
to NFL
Especially
teams.
like, I mean, I know he's like from FIU, transferred to LSU, but like guys that have that level of experience in the SEC, like if you need guys to come in and step in right away, I don't necessarily know like what his ceiling is, but I do think that he could be a starter in the right system for you, or at least like a high caliber backup. So he's somebody that, I definitely agree. I thought he had a pretty solid week. You mentioned that rep against Suman Mielen. I thought that was a pretty solid play as well. I actually am going to go, like, I'm going to talk about another offensive lineman that I was super excited to see, just because of the pipeline that this school has kind of had to the NFL recently, just in terms of like how many guys that they've been able to produce. But the Senior Bowl matters, it matters more for certain prospects than it does for others. Like, let's just be honest, for guys that play at the lower levels, these events can do wonders for that person's eval. But also I would say like the best thing, like one of the best things about the Senior Bowl and about these all-star games is that you get to see guys operate in positions that they may be better suited at the NFL level, and that we just may not have gotten as many snaps at the college level to evaluate them on. Guy that I want to talk about is Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. Like, this is a dude who played a couple of different positions in college, but he played a lot of tackle because of the 32-inch arms. He's probably going to swing inside. We got to see him at both guard spots, left and right. And then he also took snaps at center, which I thought was actually really notable and smart, because that's where I wanted to see him, partially because I just don't think that this center class is very good, especially in comparison to last year, where, how many guys did we see put positive tape on display in the NFL as rookies? Like, we got to see Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier, Graham Barton, like all those guys were like legitimately solid to good players in year one. And I just don't see that with this class. But then, I thought his anchor against power rushers was notable, like in those one-on-one type settings. And then you talked about Aeneas Peebles in the podcast last week. The guy that we really like is this kind of quick-footed pass rusher, can really cross face. They went head-to-head. Peebles tried to cross face up against him in one-on-ones, and like Zabel just completely shut it down in terms of like moving his feet, was able to mirror strike the guy, and then like he won the rep pretty decisively. So I love the posture that he plays with, the pass pro. I don't really have any concerns about him like as a run blocker. I kind of already knew what we were getting into with that portion of his game. I just wanted to see how he was going to pass protect against a lot of these really talented players that we were going to have in Mobile. So he checked that box. I've kind of already moved him up a little bit on my board. I would expect for him to be like a top or maybe the top center option in this class, once we get into that April discussion. So yeah, Gray Zabel, like huge stock up guy for me this week.
Yeah, I remember people were talking about Zabel coming into the week. I didn't really know a ton about him. I kind of watched North Dakota State like in their last game of the season, and I didn't really get a chance to pay attention to him. But man, there was a rep he had in team practices where he's going up against Darius Alexander, and they're asking him to make a reach block on outside zone. And not only does he actually gets beat initially, like Alexander beats him with like a quick swim. So what does Zabel do? He just kind of puts his back to him and just kind of like walls him off with that with like that back. And I was like, that is incredible to see. Like, I was so impressed with Zabel. That was a really good shout out by you.
He's a super smart player too, man. Like, you can see it on his film. I definitely think that a move inside is going to be good for him, but I think that he's a player who could play like really early, assuming that, he can actually like handle the snap responsibilities. Obviously, when you're moving a guy in potentially to center, like somebody who hasn't made the calls, it's a little bit dicey depending on who your quarterback is. Are they comfortable making the protections at the line of scrimmage? But yeah, Zabel was a guy I thought he had an excellent week and really helped himself.
Yeah, I was so impressed with how light he was on his feet. Like
Hmm.
like you have to be just impressed with with what you
Absolutely.
saw. And sticking to like the theme of of this podcast, because we've talked about defensive line consistently.
Hmm.
A guy who was extremely underrated. I didn't really know a ton about this guy coming into the week. Utah defensive tackle Junior Tafuna. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I was so impressed with this dude because he just could not get moved off the line of scrimmage. He was just a wall as a run anchor, and I was just super impressed with his ability to just consistently maintain the line of scrimmage, but also the power. Every single like rep he won as a pass rusher, it was just consistently his bull rush off like and then like he would finish like off a swim move, like stack and shed. This dude actually, he has almost like 33-inch arms too, and I was shocked about that. Like, I was kind of surprised, like looking at his like measurements. I was like, okay, this is a guy I need to get to, like in terms of like his fit with the Steelers. And we've talked about Cam Hayward and his ability to win off that bull rush. I really thought Tafuna was just absolutely like unstoppable with that bull rush throughout the entire week, and you even saw it. He got a sack during the game because he was just pushing guys back like into the pocket. There was edge pressure initially, but the quarterback has to like slightly climb, and then who's there? It's Tafuna. He's pushing the guard back into his lap. So I was really impressed with that. He was also around the ball. He had a fumble recovery in that game. And throughout practice week, I thought he was just consistent. I thought he was the most underrated player like the entire week. I really couldn't stop watching him, and I was just so impressed with what he was able to do. I mean, he might be more of just a bull in a china shop, but hey man, give me some power over like, guys with speed in the interior sometimes, because if you want like guys who are consistently, able to rotate in, I think a guy like Tafuna is like, that guy you want in your rotation. And I'm really curious to get to his film and see just like, the type of prospect he actually is.
Yeah, that's a good shout. I mean, I think too, like with the Steelers conversation, just getting a nose tackle to where you can actually bump Keanu Benton out to 3 tech would be like one of my biggest priorities. So,
Yes.
like, if you can find that guy on day 3, like, I'm all about that. So, yeah, he's another guy that I really want to get to the tape on. I would say like the last prospect I really want to talk about in terms of like risers from the week. I thought Quincy Riley from Louisville was another guy that I thought had really helped himself. This cornerback class, man, I've just really got a lot of admiration for like the depth of this group. I just see so many potential contributors early on. And, I thought my guy, Zaire Thomas, had a really strong finish to the week. I thought Maxwell Harrison showed himself pretty well, just in terms of like the athletic flashes that you see. But Riley, one of the better corners there on film. I thought there was times where he would be a little bit too lax to stay on top of vertical routes. And that was something that I wanted to keep an eye on. So like, one of the things that I like to do with Senior Bowl week is like I'll write questions down in my evaluations prospects in terms of like how is this going to translate to the next level, or questions that I just want to be able to ask the deeper I dive into someone's film. And like one of the questions I had about Riley is like, is he going to get beat? Like, is he going to give up too many explosive plays over the top? And I thought during the week he showed that he could mitigate those weaknesses. I thought that he matched up with Xavier Restrepo several times. He came with forced incompletions there. I know Restrepo has a lot of fans in the NFL draft community. I thought Riley really won that matchup multiple times in one-on-ones, which is a drill specifically, indicated or, shaded towards the offense, obviously. But, we talked about Jaden Higgins too, like just how automatic he is on those back shoulders. Quincy Riley got a pass breakup against Higgins in one-on-one where he kind of squeezed him to the sideline and was able to use that as kind of an extra defender. But he's a little bit of an older prospect. I mean, I think he played like 3 years at Middle Tennessee State, I think 3 at Louisville, but 15 career interceptions, multiple pick sixes. The ball skills are a plus. He was actually a guy that was on my radar last year. I thought he was actually going to come out. He ended up going back to school. But, yeah, I mean, I think the stock up, here for sure. I think he's probably a guy that's going to go somewhere in the mid rounds. Could maybe go day 2, depending on how he tests it, but could get pushed down the board just because of how many other like talented prospects there are at that position group. And somebody could come away with like a legit contributor.
Yeah, that was a good shout. That's definitely a good shout. Like I watched Jarvis Brownlee, during like the season last year during that draft process, and Riley was always a player that was impressing me. What really got me, you mentioned it like several times, like his ability to squeeze along the sideline, and it was always like late, like enough where he wasn't making like egregious contact. Like I was seeing him get his head back around, to deflect passes. You watch him mirror off the line of scrimmage, releases. Higgins had like one release, and believe it's the same exact play you're talking about where he got the pass breakup. Like he was like he was doing anything he could to shake him off the line of scrimmage, and like he just mirrored him completely, squeezes him to the sideline, and gets that pass breakup. I was really impressed with his ability to get his head back, and play the ball. And I really like that physicality in a corner. So I definitely feel like Riley was a guy who definitely made his mark in Mobile.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. I know Brownlee, I think, was the DB of the week last year at the Senior Bowl, and I
Yes.
think they named Riley the DB of the week this year, right? Am I right about that?
I'm not sure if it was Riley or if it was Upton Stout. It might have
Okay,
been.
okay.
It might.
Upton Stout was another guy like from Western, somebody that I had very, very little knowledge of. I mean, he's a featherweight man. He's really, really small, but the dude was super competitive. I mean, I think he came in at like 5'8", so he's going to be a
Yeah.
nickel at the next level. But that dude competed all week long. He was somebody that I'm very anxious to kind of get through a little bit more film on him. Is that all of our prospect risers? Did you
I
have one
just
more?
I'm just gonna give an honorable mention because
Okay,
the Senior Bowl quarterback play was not very good. I thought Tyler Shuck
it
was
was
maybe
bad.
like the most consistent, but he's gonna be like 26 in the first month of his rookie season. We have to constantly reiterate this. So I really think a guy who actually ended up rising throughout this was Kyle McCord down at the Shrine Bowl. He didn't even get to play during he opted out of the game, but like he was consistently like on time. He was
Hmm.
anticipating, he was layering over the middle of the field, which you'll see a ton with his film. And I really think like, the fact that he's like slightly younger than a lot of these guys, there might be some upside to tap into. He could make that discussion. Now, would I draft him super high? Probably not, but like, we talk about some of the hype that's coming out of Mobile for like
Sure.
Jackson Dart that we don't really understand. I feel like that hype maybe could be more directed towards McCord in terms of like, a guy who has been impressive in terms of like just being able to lead. And I really thought he did his job at the Shrine Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good shot with McCord. I thought he took a really positive step forward this past season after a lot of people, honestly, kind of like myself included, wrote him off a little bit after transferring from Ohio State. Yeah, I mean, there was another question I think on Twitter that somebody said, you saw it too, but it was like based on the perceived hype, which player you just completely out on this draft. I won't single like Jackson Dart out. I'm just like any first or second round quarterback specifically for the Steelers, I'm completely out on. Like, just do
Yeah.
not do it. Please don't do it. Please don't make me talk about it. Please don't, make me talk myself into that sort of selection. Just this is just not the quarterback class to do that. But one of the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about here specifically, we got another like really good question, and this is like something that I feel like is not talked about enough, like with content creators or like writers, anything like that, because I do think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. It's from Gavin. He said, I guess discuss the general reasons why it's good to or not to trade back. A lot of fans discuss it. It always sounds good in theory, but doesn't always make sense. And this is like really good because it kind of goes hand in hand with something I tweeted out earlier this week. Mock drafts in general they just get so many more views, like mock drafts in general do. But like with the mock draft simulators now being available like to your casual fan, it's got so many more people invested in the NFL draft process, which I
Yeah.
think is a great thing. It's a great thing for business. It's great for this channel. It's great for so many people trying to make a living off the NFL draft. And I love that aspect of it. But a lot of times in those like mock drafts, like screenshots, you'll see teams like trading up and down all around. But I do think it's worthwhile to discuss like times where that is a good idea and times where that isn't. So what are your kind of thoughts on that? Specifically, we'll say for the Steelers, like in the first round of the draft, should they be looking to trade out or stay put or whatever?
Trading down always sounds good in theory because
Hmm.
it's like, okay, you get into a draft class and the depth is better than like the top end talent.
Yep.
So so everyone's like, okay, everyone just trade down. Well, teams are probably thinking the same thing. They don't want to give up a lot, to move up in that situation. So it sounds good in theory, but it doesn't quite work that way. So I like if the Steelers could trade down in a situation where, like, say there's not an elite talent or, like, like a strong talent at defensive line or corner, in the first round, I'd understand, wanting to explore a different, position in terms of depth and maybe like trade down and get like a Caleb Johnson or something like that at running back. Like, let's say you decide to do that instead. Like, I definitely think that there are options. I just don't really understand like the whole theory. It's great in theory. It's just it's
Hmm.
not always going to work because teams are not always going to let you get what you want in the situation. You might get like maybe a day 3 pick out of it in a class like this, as opposed to like if you did it in last year's class, trying to trade down from Malik Neighbors, which if you tried to do that, I mean, like, imagine how that would have gone. You probably would have gotten a
Sure.
lot more picks in that situation, or like a JJ McCarthy. I definitely see this class as more of like a stronger in depth as opposed to, strong at the top. So sounds good in
Sure.
theory, but they'd have to get the right offer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always tough to discuss. Everybody wants to trade back because it gives you like more bites of the apple, right? Like you can get more picks to play with. It's more fun to do the mock draft simulators when you have like 12 selections and 12 players you can pick. But it's tough to say like, hey, we're planning on trading back because you just don't know who's going to be there. I think it's worthwhile to explore those possibilities, especially in draft rooms for like real NFL
Yes.
teams. But like last year, for example, Troy Fautano, of course, missed basically the bulk of his rookie season, almost all of it. But he would have been a guy that if you would have asked me before the draft, would you like to trade back if he was on the board? I never in a million years thought that he was going to be available to the Steelers where they picked
Yeah.
because he was my number 7 overall prospect in the class. So a guy like that falls all the way to 20, you can't trade back at that point. Like this is if you view that person as a legit like first round grade. And speaking of like first round grades, this is going to be like one of the shallowest classes that I've ever evaluated just in terms of like true first round talent. There's not a ton of blue chip talent at the top that typically does correlate with bad quarterback classes. So I do agree with you with what you're saying. It's like there's a lot of depth in this class to where I could see like maybe honestly like the top I would say like between like 18 and like 45 or so on my board seems really, really close just in terms of like the grades that I've like set aside for players that I
Yes.
have full grades on right now. Still waiting the combine and a lot of other film that I want to get to, specifically along the offensive line. But I think like would this year be a good year for them to trade down and gather more picks? Sure, but you just don't know like who's going to be available to you at that point in time, and it may be a guy that you necessarily can't pass up on. So I think it's a good theory, and I think it's always something that you should be open to as a GM. You should always accept those phone calls when you're up on the clock, but it's not something that you can ever like pigeonhole yourself into saying like, okay, we're definitely trading down no matter what. Unless the only situation I could maybe see like that is like if you're a team like the Vikings who has like 3 or 4 selections in the entire draft and you know that you have maybe 5 holes that you're going to need contributors for, maybe not starters, but you need depth. You may say like, hey, we've got to trade back pretty much unless, there are
Yeah.
probably exceptions to that even. So, but yeah, I think it sounds like a good idea. Is there anyone, I know I'm going to put you on the spot here, but because honestly, I can't really think of one myself right now, but is there anyone in the top, like maybe like top 10 consensus guys that would drop that would cause you to say like, absolutely, there's no way I'm going to trade down like whatsoever before we get out of
Mason
here?
Graham.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
That's the easy one, I would say. Maybe
Hmm.
like Kenneth Grant. I think those are guys that like have those appealing traits in terms of just being able to be a dominant prospect at the next level. Grant
Hmm.
maybe a little more raw, but Graham, like, we saw what he was able to do in a lot of his games. And, we talk about this defensive line class in terms of, it's a pick your flavor type of class. So
Sure.
maybe a guy
Yeah.
like Graham ends up falling out of favor as opposed to like, some of these guys who are longer levered, like a Derek Harmon or like
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say Darius Alexander because he's a 6-year senior. So, but maybe like a Walter Nolan, who's people see that upside with that
The
they could tap
flashes, yep,
into.
100%. Yeah, I mean it, and even then, like it's hard to see like that being like a scenario, you know what I'm saying? Because like I think we both are pretty high on Graham. Like I'm just sitting here like looking at like my specific board that I've got built out right now. Graham's the third ranked prospect in the class, and he's been inside my top 5 really dating back to summer scouting. So I love his game so much. So I'm with you. Like if he were to fall like even into like striking distance to where he would get to like 17, I don't think there's many prospects I would want to trade up for, but that's like a jump that I would trade up a couple picks to like make sure that I got that type of player, just because I think he's so dynamic, man. That Ohio State game film is just one that will always stick with me. But yeah, I appreciate everybody tapping in. Once again, on your way out, just please make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, drop us any comments or questions that you guys might have. Could appear in future videos. As for Nick and myself, we will see you guys next week. Peace and love.